Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to this podcast today. Now, do you know what your spiritual DNA is? I know I had no clue. I'm hoping to find out. We all know that we have regular DNA, but did you know that you had spiritual DNA? Do you even know how to access it? Do you know how to use it? Well, my guest today is going to talk all about that and hopefully teach us how. And it sounds like she's going to decode my spiritual DNA. So I'm really excited about that. My guest today is all the way from Australia, Carmel Niland, and she is the former CEO and leader of various government agencies on gender, racial equality, human rights, and child protection in New South Wales, Australia. She has recently written a book called Our Spiritual DNA, 12 Ascended Masters and the Evidence for Our Divine Ancestry. So I am very, very excited about this. Carmel, welcome to the Path 11 podcast.
Thank you very much. I should also mention that I have an American son born in Ithaca, New York.
Ithaca.
I was a student there.
Yeah, one of my best friends lives in Ithaca. Every time I go there, I buy a new shirt that says Ithaca is gorgeous because they have the beautiful gorges there.
It is.
And it is. I've spent a lot of time in Ithaca. It's beautiful.
It is.
Yeah, and you went to Cornell University there, you had said?
For a little while. My husband did his PhD there. We both were at the University of Illinois first. That's in Champaign-Urbana. And went there where I gave birth to a son, Tompkins County Hospital, just in case anybody's listening from Ithaca.
Yeah, I'll have to send this podcast to my best friend Tracy because that's right where she lives. Yeah. So how does one kind of work with local government agencies and then all of a sudden you're writing a book about spiritual DNA? So give us a little bit of your background.
Okay. Well, what it is, it's really like having dual personalities. So I had a regular life with regular degrees, living in regular places, bringing up my children, and then I went to work in government. And I ran government agencies. But all the time, I was conscious that I was living in two worlds. So I could see the auric field of people. So imagine sitting in a meeting with everybody there, ministers of the crown, important people, and they start talking. And you can see by their auric field that they're telling you a bunch of hogwash.
Oh,
got it?
Got it.
You see the colours around them. And it's like they blush and you think, oh, and then they go kind of purple colour, and then they go kind of that khaki colour. Mm-hmm. And you think, telling me a porky, literally. So having lived in that two worlds, the other thing I think that's critical is that I was brought up, I am a Catholic, and that is the most mystical, one of the most mystical of religions. So I lived with my grandmother when I was little, and she was Irish, and she would say to me, go and play with the fairies in the garden. So that's what I would do, because that's what Irish kids do.
Yeah.
And then I go to a convent, and I'm taught by Irish Catholic nuns. So once again, you're shifting between the realities, and you're shifting into things that are a way of looking at the world where other entities are around, including in the garden. Mm-hmm. So that's how I lived in two worlds. And by the time I got to give up my work, my paid work, I just settled into doing what I really wanted to do, which was write about Merlin. And the other thing that fascinated me was that we had physical DNA. So why didn't we have spiritual DNA too? I mean, I never doubted the fact that we had a soul. Mm-hmm. So how did it work? And if the nuns told me that I was part of God, how did that work? So I tried to ask myself those questions and come up with answers. And it took, 30 years or so, but eventually I got there.
Yeah. Now, I know that you also received the help of working with a lama. Was it a
Tibetan lama?
Tibetan lama that had the ability to also go in between worlds. And he began to channel for you as you were asking these questions. And maybe we should talk a little bit about the ascended masters, because you talk about the number 12 being very important and that there's 12 ascended masters. And I know that you were very connected to Saint Germain.
Yes.
Okay.
So let's start with all of that. Just on the matter of 12 first. There are 12 members of a jury. There are 12 apostles. There are 12 ascended masters. Right? There are 12 in a dozen. There are all kinds of 12. So when Yeshua ben Joseph, Jesus, was on this earth, he put 12 around him. And when you actually look at the elements of DNA, you'll see that there are like 12 aspects of DNA. This is of human DNA.
Mm-hmm.
So I started to work with 12, and I would go to a channeling session, and a person would kind of go to sleep in the chair. He would call in this Tibetan master, and the Tibetan master would say, "Well, who do you want to talk to?" I didn't know. He said it was the best. And he said, Saint Germain. He never said Saint Germain. He always said it. So it was like almost singing, or it's like some sacred space you're going into. And one of the first opportunities I had to speak to Saint Germain through this channel, he came in and he was dressed in purple, like exactly the same violet color as you have behind you.
Mm-hmm.
And I could see him with my inner eye. He twirled around like a ballerina. And I said, "Are you a ballerina?" He said, "I invented ballet." But he said it in French. No, I can't do that accent. And I thought, well, this is going to be interesting. And he started telling me about some of the lives he had. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And do you ever have female lives? And he said, yes, I do. I'm better at them, he said. And then he started naming what in Australia we'd call blokes. You'd call them guys. Other people who also were his mates, who sat round a kind of a table, we'll say a table, like the Knights of the Round Table. There were 12 of them, by the way, too. Like there are 12 members of the Zodiac. So he would sit there and he would say, now, on my left, I have Mother Mary. And on my right, I have Katumi. And Katumi's female aspect, he didn't say that, but I've certainly found out later, is Lady Portia. And then he would go round the table until we got to the full 12. 6 females, 6 males, or feminine energy and male energy. So that was the beginning. And I would ask him about the lives that he had. And he had lives of great mystery, lives of daring do. He loved dance, he loved singing, he loved composing. It struck me a lot of the time, he sounded more gay than, you know what I mean? He sounded more like a gay than he ever did anything else. He certainly didn't sound Australian. He would tell me about the things he invented, and he has been a remarkable inventor. He's been an adventurer. So he would say, well, he'd say in French, I discovered America. I said, well, how did you do that? He said, I got in a boat, sailed west. There it was. And I said, surely there were people here when you already got there. He said, yes. So how come you say you discovered it? I thought Christopher Columbus discovered America, in inverted commas. And he said, but who do you think Christopher Columbus was?
Ah.
So we worked.
Incarnation.
Who do you think Rudolph Nureyev was? A great ballet dancer. Who do you think the inventor of electricity was? Saint Germain. And so it would go on. And a magical mystery tour it was. I asked him who his female aspect was, and he said, my female aspect is threefold. And I said, well, there's one of you and there's three of her. And he said, well, you know what women are like. He said, they can't quite decide which way they want to show their face. So there's Mary the Mother, there's Mary the Magdalene, and there's Mary the High Priestess. And he pointed to me and he said, you come from the energy line of Mary the High Priestess. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he said, well, probably in your history, the one you'd remember first is Isis. And I said, well, she started Egypt. He said, yes. But I said, Cleopatra shut it down. You're not going to tell me I was Cleopatra too. And he said, you wish. And so it went on. Now, I'm giving you little precis of it, but in fact, they were more like dictations, quite lengthy ones, of which were being recorded and then would be transcribed. And originally, I just looked at Saint Germain, Mary in her three aspects, and no one else. And then I had to expand it because that's a very limited audience. So I had to do everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't matter whether it's Donald Trump, Ronald Reagan, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, all of them had to say, okay, tell me who he was. Tell me who he was. And after a while, it became easy because another being, Katumi, who was the world teacher, came through. And he said to me, look, rather than you asking me tediously who was who in the zoo, it would be so much easier if you just looked at their first name. And I said, why? And he said, well, in their name, you can get an idea of who they are. Sometimes they fool you and they get a mixed up name because it's their grandfather's name or their grandmother's name and they had to be called that. But if they can come in themselves and speak clearly to the mother, their own mother, then she can usually convince everybody else what name they should be called. So when we look at your name, and give me your full name.
It's April Ann Hannah.
April Ann Hannah. April is not a common name. So I'm just going to put that aside for the moment and I'll look at April Ann Hannah. Look at Ann and Hannah and include your last name as one. Now, both of those names are the names that are used by the aspect Mary, and in your case, Mary the Mother. And Mary the Mother seldom incarnates. So in America at the moment, there might be, I'll make this number up, but I want to give you the idea about how few it would be. There might be between 20 and 50 Mary the Mothers in the whole of the United States of America, including Hawaii and the lot. So out of those millions of people, it would be about 50. So it's a great pleasure to meet a Mary the Mother.
Wow.
So that's a kind of rambling way about how I got there.
Yeah. Okay. So let me make sure I'm following you. So the way I'm understanding it is that there are these 12 ascended masters and that all of us come from at least one of them. So the ascended masters are reincarnating into human beings. Mm-hmm. They can be our great inventors, our beautiful musicians, the famous people, but everybody comes from a certain ascended master. And
Correct.
this is what you've been able to decode.
And it doesn't matter how unknown they are, how humble they are, whether they're lying in the gutter tonight. They are all a descendant of, they are all an aspect, is a better way of saying it, of an ascended master. So they're one of those 12 energies.
Okay, now in your book, you help people to kind of decode this. And where are my notes here? That you help people to decode your name, figure out your master color, and then you actually read more of like the biographies that are in your book of each ascended master to really see who you connect with the most. So I'm curious though, so you've decoded my name, clearly you've been doing this for a while, but what does it mean to have an aspect of the Mother Mary? So what does that mean for me if I'm a part of that spiritual DNA? What do I do with that?
Well, the Mother Mary was chosen by Yeshua ben Joseph, who came in as Jesus Christ, to be his mother. And this may sound a little non-Christian, but when he had his previous life as Buddha, his mother's name was Maya, which was like Tibetan for Mary. So his mother is always constant. She's always the same thing whenever he may incarnate. Now, that's not the same with you and I. When we incarnate, we will choose a particular, depending on what kind of life we have to go into, what we have to learn, what we have to lead, what we have to discover ourselves. We will choose a particular master energy to be our parents. And he always chose her, Mary the Mother.
Mm-hmm.
And why? She was already ascended. She was compassionate. She was intelligent. And she clearly had very good physical DNA, no matter whatever life she came in. She met his requirements, plus his spiritual requirements, because if you're going to come in as a person who's going to teach others, then you've got to have a mother who can teach you.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And she, as I've checked her lives, this is Mary the Mother, she's done things like found schools, particularly schools for girls. She has often been a nurse, always tending to be in a helping profession, but sometimes she will be a prime minister. So in the news tonight has been the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern. She's an aspect of Mary the Mother. And the woman who is running Germany at the moment, Angela Merkel, is also an aspect of Mary the Mother. So you're in very good company here.
Hey, I'll take it. And so what would the master color...
She wasn't doing that, she'd write.
What would the master color be for Mary the Mother?
It would be blue.
Ah, okay.
And it'd be blue with a little tinge of the violet in it. The master color of Saint Germain is violet. So...
Very interesting. Well, and the reason why I'm kind of smirking and smiling a little bit is, of course, I didn't know this before we got on the call, but, interesting enough, it was right before COVID, I was getting ready to open up a Reiki training center, but I had 7 girls with me, kind of like a school, like where I'm teaching people energy work and teaching them Reiki, and they were all female. So that's interesting. There's like a correlation there. My favorite color has always been blue. And I've always, during a really spiritual, interesting experience, I call them the blue people, that when I've done energy work before, that they have come into my sessions. I've talked about this on the podcast before. And like the wall that I'm in, or the room that I'm in right now, is painted blue. My office colors are usually always blue. And I have called in Mother Mary into some healing sessions with clients before, knowing that she was one of the masters. And the first time I ever really got introduced to a lot of these names that you're talking about that are in your book was from a tarot deck called the Keepers of Light. And I bought it after I was trained in angelic Reiki, because we were channeling ascended masters and archangels and stuff like that. So I'm very familiar with the energy of, like, Hilarion, Lady Nada, Kuan Yin. I mean, like so many of them, I was like, oh yeah, I've worked with that energy before, but never have gone so in depth as you have to really understand who these beings are. So your book has been very helpful, because you give like a really nice overview of the essence of each master. Just in your book alone is like a great reference for me that I'm going to go back to understand a little bit more about these beings that I work with. And I have never gotten like too involved, because I just feel like their intelligence surpasses anything that I can really understand. And I just allow myself to transmit them coming in, when my client, pulls the card. So, but I have called in Mother Mary quite often. And she has such beautiful energy. Like,
well, you now know why she rushes into you.
I guess so. Yeah. I mean, it really is kind of that nurturing. Yeah. So that's wonderful. I'll have to read up a little bit more on that. So is there any way, once we find out what our spiritual DNA is, our master color, how can I and others who are listening, when they figure that out, begin to maximize that and really begin to call this in now? Because like, I can't, now that I've heard this, I can't unhear what you just told me today. So that makes me want to do more.
Is to become familiar with who the other masters are.
Okay.
Because your equivalent master would be Saint Germain.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, he discovered America and just about everything else. He was a great inventor. He wrote Shakespeare. What were that? He is a beautiful writer, very dramatic. Sometimes has a bad hair day, but other than that, he's pretty delicious. I find, too, that if one looks at, say, the American presidents and their wives, one can get a fairly good idea of what these energies might look like, because these are people who have been voted into an office. Mm-hmm. Except perhaps the leader, George Washington, wasn't voted into an office. He kind of led an army, and then they just said, you're it, you're the president. Mm-hmm. But all of the others, at some stage or another, were voted in. So there's a certain popularity. People saw things in them, saw that they were ethical, saw that they were a great leader. And I just thought I'd just have a look at some of them and give you an idea of who they are and talk about those masters.
Sure.
You mentioned that sometimes you work with Hilarion. Well, he is, with Saint Germain, the founding energy of the United States. We're not talking about of America, which pre-existed, but once it separated from Britain and started receiving immigrants and slaves from other countries. George Washington was the leader, and he's an aspect of Hilarion. And Hilarion is often a leader. He would say Alexander the Great, for example. He is he works with the color emerald green, and he is nearly always tall, not short. He is, I'm just trying to think how I'll describe him. And he's usually pretty handsome as well. So, he's got a lot of things going for him. He tends to he brings in all great changes. So if you want someone who can get America together and get it on its feet, he wins a war, and then he settles into running the show. And he brings in people with him who were all some of the best master energies ever. So he marries Martha Washington, and she's an aspect of Mary the Magdalene. John Adams was El Mariah. Now, he was one of the beginning fathers of America, and his name, John Adams. John, he ain't, because that's a Katoombi name. And in those days, they didn't have middle names, so it's not very hard. But when you look at Adam, his other name, you get the sense that you're looking at somebody who is the first man. And the first man, Adam with Eve, was none other than El Mariah. So that's actually how you get to it. Sometimes, if I can just go away from the first founders and just talk a little bit about Abraham Lincoln, whose wonderful monument I loved going to. And I looked to him. Now, he has the name Abraham, and that goes right back to the beginning of Judaism. The founder of Judaism, if you like, was Abraham. So it's a good foundation name. He was a man of impeccable fortitude and courage, not only fortitude, but morality as well. He was involved in the Civil War, and he comes back occasionally to have other lives because he's very wedded to America. We had the pleasure of having him return in Australia as John Fay, who was one of our governors of the state and was very critical in the running of Olympics and of, doing that for the whole world. John Adams was married to Abigail Adams, and she was Mary the High Priestess. Alexander Hamilton, notice the name Alexander. I said that Hilarion was Alexander the Great. So Alexander Hamilton was Hilarion. James Madison. James is a favourite St. Germain name. And there's also a wonderful avenue called Madison Avenue in New York. It's all about advertising. Well, he pretty much invented advertising. So he's associated with James Madison. Dolly Madison is an interesting thing. She was called Dolly because she was so pretty. And one of the prettiest of all of the master energies is Lady Portia. She's the female aspect of Katoombi. And when you think of people like Grace Kelly or Jacqueline Kennedy as an exceptionally beautiful Americans, and your current vice president is also an aspect of Lady Portia. Expect great things of her. Thomas Jefferson. Thomas is an interesting name. He was one of the apostles' names. And he loves the name Thomas. So almost whenever you come across a Thomas, including Thomas the Tank Engine, you can be certain that it is the Serapis Bay energy. As an Australian, or if you're British, you would know him as Winston Churchill. And you'd also know him as Einstein and Isaac Newton. With this particular energy, you are talking brains. So if we go right back to the foundation of Egypt, there was Isis, who was Mary the High Priestess, and there was Osiris, who was Serapis Bey. And they worked with Katoombi, who was 95% of every pharaoh that Egypt over 3,000 years ever had, 95% of them were him. And Khatumi is the master in charge of geometry, mathematics, and all the rest of it. So when you look at Egypt, particularly from the air, you can see this pharaoh who kept putting geometric symbols on the landscape. The pyramid is typical of, his kind of thinking. And if you can look at it as a mathematician, you can start to understand Khatumi. Benjamin Franklin is a particular special of mine, a special friend and favourite of mine. Benjamin was a biblical name, and that was a favourite life of Saint Germain, and he was back as Benjamin Franklin. Deborah Reed Franklin was Mary Magdalene. John Jay was Khatumi, and Sarah J was Mary the High Priestess. So you had quite a lineup there. Now, what I'd like you to do is to take a master's name, and I'll work again, I think, with a president. Let's look at Donald Trump. Right? Donald Trump's energy is called Dwal Kul. And the energy of Dwal Kul is used for two things. The first that it's used for is to create a man of enormous strength, a man who could wrestle an elephant, a man like Hercules, for example, who was that same energy. Or almost the opposite of that, the other thing that Dwal Kul does is fester the rot. So if something is rotten in the state of Denmark or in the state of the United States, he will come in as a president and he will point to you all the rotten bits so that they're hanging like rotten fruit, so you can see what you actually got to do to fix the place up. Mm. That's what he does. But at the same time, he also is a handsome man. He was the King of England during the war, and that was necessary because you had to have someone very strong standing up to Hitler. And I'm just trying to think of Ronald Reagan, good-looking guy. But came in at the right time to be president of the US. Any questions? Will I go on to some more?
Yeah, no, I just think it's interesting. With Dwal Kul, I also took a training in Esoteric Healing. Mm-hmm. And in the Esoteric Healing, he is considered to be the ascended master that also created the Esoteric Healing. So, that's my familiar knowledge of working with him. And I guess just kind of going back to Saint Germain, so the way that I was first introduced to him was from a teacher that said, whatever you want to release in your karma, just throw into the fire of Saint Germain. You can call upon his flame and put it into the middle of the room, and then just whatever you need to release and let go of, put that into the flame. So that was kind of what I was told originally. And then when I bought this deck, one of the things that I noticed is a lot of clients pull Saint Germain. And on the card in the Keepers of Light, it talks about them releasing their karma. So can you maybe just talk a little bit more about Saint Germain and this releasing of karma, or why, we're told to use his violet flame and to just cast whatever it is that we need to release and let go into that flame?
Okay. He is as close to a flame of love that you can possibly think of. He burns with this love. And that is that fits in with him as that also fits in with him with his not only his spiritual practices, but his marvelous inventiveness. So inventing just about everything from electricity, to the kind of electricity Edison, for example, to inventing Madison Avenue. So a master of spin. And then you take all those different parts of him, and in the center is the violet flame. And this is a fountain of creativity and of love. And he is, as well as doing everything else, he's reaching down and giving you a helping hand and pulling you out of a bad situation, because he has strength, possibly not the strength of a Doyle call, but strength and this a marvellous compassion. And as I said, Yeshua ben Joseph coming in had anyone he could the whole 11 masters, because although we see them as males and females, they can cross over whenever they see fit. He had the whole choice, and he chose Saint Germain as the father. So he's also that father imagery. He embraces you, he inspires you, and he loves you.
Yeah. Okay. So if we go back to like what you said, you're seeing aspects of Dewal Cool in Trump, and Trump came and showed us all the rotten fruit that needed to be picked off. And now we have Joe Biden. What ascended master is working through him? Who is he a part of?
His name is Joseph, who was Jesus' father. So that is Saint Germain. So Joe, as he prefers to be called, what comes from exactly the same line as Jesus selected as his dad. And he will be like a father to America. We won't always agree with everything he does. It doesn't mean that you've got to vote for him. But what he will be is decent, loving, upright, hardworking. I mean, what does he choose to be as the father? He chose to be a carpenter. He chose to make things that were useful. Right?
Well, okay, interesting. And
so you'll see all of that coming through the man that you have at the moment.
Yeah, and I want to let people know too that you have a really nice chart and list of a ton of people's names.
That's right.
So if you buy this book, you'll be able to search for your name very quickly and see,
That's right.
who your ascended master is, and then you can go back in the book and, read more about it.
Them.
Yeah.
So I call it the who's who in the zoo, because I was always interested in what lay behind. So, and as I was always trying to work out who they all were, I became more interested in who everybody else was as well. So I would be constantly going to sessions and I would be saying, well, tell me all about Ronald Reagan. Or what about Elvis Presley? Or, or what about my husband? Who's he? Or what about my son? 2 sons. Who are they? And they've got these kinds of characteristics. And I have got this pain in the neck who's an employee of mine at the moment. Who's she? I would say in a hushed voice, and I'd be told, I'd go, oh, no. Because I always thought that this woman who I thought was a pain in the neck was, and she turned out to be Lady Portia, who is beautiful, sweet, tough, highly admirable. Look, to me, she wasn't. Let's have a look at some of the ones I haven't mentioned. Pallas Athene. Pallas Athene is the female aspect of El Mariah, and she obviously was the head of Greece, the great goddess of Athena, the goddess of wisdom. And she is often the leader, and she naturally is very good at running things. I'm going to think of And her typical names are Helen and Elsie and Ella. And another one that's quite interesting is Lady Nada. She is the female aspect of Hilarion. So if you've got a being called Hilarion, then Hilary would be like the female aspect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So which leader have you had who's called Hillary?
Hillary Clinton.
Right. So that will be Lady Nada. Now, that's not to say that Lady Nada doesn't have many other names. She does, but she doesn't incarnate that often. It's not an energy necessarily that most people will be familiar with. Another interesting one is just going back to Dwell Cool at the moment. The female aspect of Dwell Cool is called Lady Fortunata. And a world leader at the moment is Lady Fortunata. Putin had an interesting relationship with Donald Trump, didn't he?
Mm-hmm.
There you have the male and the female of it, two of them running two of the greatest powers in the world. So just think from God's point of view, what might be the subtext that's going on there.
Mm. Wow.
We think we know, but when we know some of this, we know other things.
Yeah. So it feels like to me, you have almost perfected this down to a science where probably anyone that you meet now at this point, you are able to see which ascended master they are.
Yes,
that's fascinating.
But for example, if you can see the arc field around a person, like I can around you, then I've got a clue anyway.
So would my auric field also have the color blue in it because I'm connected to?
Yes.
Okay. And I've been told that before.
But it's blue, like pictures that you see of Mary, who I would call out as a Catholic, I'd call her Our Lady. It's that kind of blue. It's blue with a little bit of violet in it as well, from St. Germain's Violet Flame.
Yeah. So that's so interesting because years ago, I should probably have this psychic medium. She was phenomenal. Tracy Flutie is her name. She's local here to the area. And that's one of the things that she does when you first go and talk to her, and she can see your auric field and your color. And I have the notes on it. And she said, you are of a blue and a purple aura. I was like, okay, I love those colors too, my favorite colors. But, didn't explain the way that you're explaining. Well, what, people will say, well, what does blue mean? What does purple mean? But so this is like, again, I'm always looking for credibility and validation. And it's like, okay, you're telling me some of the same stuff that other people have told me, but in a different way and connecting it to the ascended masters. So when you hear
and I put it all within a framework.
Right. Yes.
So as you understand each of the ascended masters and their color,
right,
and the kind of roles that they have played on the earth, then you start. The penny starts dropping. You start to understand. Yes. So I can look and drive my husband mad watching television, particularly the news. I'm going to say,
because you just want to see who is everyone.
Look who's in there at the moment.
Yeah.
Kutumi. Kutumi's a favourite of mine because he's my guide. And we've talked about Lady Portia, who's the female aspect of him. And he has played a particular role in America. He's been very prominent here. He's been very prominent, and I'm just trying to think of some of the Kutumis. He was St. Francis. He was Galahad. He was Shah Jahan of India. He was St. John and all the other John names, was one of the apostles. He was St. Jude. He was Kevin Isaac, and Yitzhak. He was Louis, as in Louis XIV, Oliver and Olivier, Roger, Ronald, but not Ronald Reagan, Theodore, Tristan, Ulysses, Odysseus, and then William and all of the other forms of William, like Bill and Willie and Liam. So there are probably 4 masters, there are 8 in a sense, but there's Kutubi and Lady Portia, there is Saint Germain and the 3 aspects of Mary, there is El Mariah, and there is Hilarion. And these are the ones that you will come across most commonly. And knowing how they work will help you understand who everybody else is.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to highly encourage everyone to check out your book, to get it, to figure out what your spiritual DNA is. Again, Carmel makes it very easy. And can you also let people know what your website is, how people can find more information out about you? Your books are available, I'm sure, like on Amazon, anywhere where you purchase books. And just let people know what the name of your website is.
Well, I have one website that's called Our Spiritual DNA, like that. I hope that's right, Our Spiritual DNA. And that will help explain further than I'm able to tonight the concepts of our spiritual DNA. I have another website which is called A Darker Magic This Way Comes, which is part of the novel in the Merlin series that I'm writing. And I also have my own website. But my own website, because I've got such diverse interests, might take you up the garden path, because I'm I was the Australian president of the Iris Society, for example. So you're likely to see a lot of iris there. Why? Well, it was Saint Germain's favourite colour, purple, And so I've gone off and round a whole lot of things.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for we really just covered, there was so much involved in your book. So we were really kind of touching on the highlights of this. And I hope that we sparked, a lot of curiosity in everyone listening today to really want to investigate their spiritual DNA. If these names are new to you and you have never heard the names of the Ascended Masters, I would use this podcast as a way to get curious about it, read about them. Like I said, the Keepers of Light, I can't think of the gentleman who created them. He's pretty famous too, but that's a great tarot deck that I use all the time in my practice. And that's kind of also an easy way to get to know these energies and these names. But Carmel's book really does a very, very beautiful job of going more in depth with really understanding who the Ascended Masters are. So we will put her website in your show notes. And I'd like to thank you, Carmel, again for being here. And I'd like to thank everyone for listening today. Take care, everyone.